I didn't marry a villain. I married a woman who could turn a to-do list into a ladder and make the top feel 2 inches away. Claire used to sketch futures on napkins in cafes near the river, her pen moving faster than the waitress could refill our coffee. She circled verbs like they were coordinates: build, pitch, launch, lead. And I loved the way she believed in motion. I'm a systems analyst. Momentum to me is tickets closed, error rates slashed, downtime measured in minutes, not hours. Claire's momentum was applause without a stage yet. Somewhere in between those tempos, we built a life in Chicago that worked. A one-bedroom in River North with a view that stole just enough skyline to remind you you weren't alone. A battered dining table rescued from a Craigslist stranger, a Saturday ritual of farmers market peaches and arguments about whether basil belongs in everything. We were not perfect, but we were daily. Her new job looked like the kind of glass wall dream people post about. The agency was on the 25th floor of a loop tower where the elevators smelled like cologne you can only buy in airports. They called themselves a growth studio because marketing firms hate the word agency now. Claire came home that first week talking about war rooms and sprints and a deck so clean it made a client clap. She said Richard Hastings' name like it had weight. He was the vice president over brand strategy, the sort of executive who prefers to sit at the head of a rectangular table even when the meeting is on Zoom. She said he noticed things. He noticed how she framed a narrative. He noticed how she handled a tense call. He noticed potential. There's a tone some people use for mentors that's part worship, part resume. I heard that tone and I filed it next to pride. I wanted her to have someone who opened doors. The shift didn't happen with a bang. It shivered into the air like heat off asphalt. A later train home that turned into an Uber with a receipt she didn't explain. New clothes that read conference even when the calendar said Tuesday. The phone left face down on the counter like a little black stone. I told myself stress is messy, that clients who spend six figures expect their people to bleed time. Claire would touch my shoulder in the kitchen and say, 2 more weeks and it calms down, the way you talk to a dog on fireworks night. I nodded. I stir-fried. I washed the pan. I waited for quiet that didn't arrive. I met Richard once at a cocktail thing where the agency revealed a rebrand to a client and everyone clapped as if fonts could save a business model. He had the kind of smile that needs a spotlight, the kind that makes waiters move faster. He asked me what I did and made a joke about how every company is a tech company now, which is what people say when they want to sound current without committing to a noun. Claire watched us the way a hostess does, measuring, arranging, making sure plates don't crash. On the train home, she leaned her head on my shoulder and said, "You didn't have to be so formal." I didn't know how to explain that something about him made me careful, like walking across ice that looks solid until it isn't. The first undeniable proof didn't look like proof. It was a calendar invite titled Workshop Leadership Narrative, 7,030 p.m., a dress that belonged to a hotel 1 block off Michigan Avenue. There was a note in the description: bring printed comps, we'll review on site, and the guest list included only two names, Richard Hastings and Claire Adams. I know because Claire's Google account was still signed into our iPad from when we planned a vacation to Door County and never signed out. I tapped the little circle hoping to see room name or conference floor. What I saw was a map pin on a suite level and a photo of a carpet pattern that had never seen a strategy session. My stomach didn't drop so much as step out of the room. I could have confronted her. I could have said the word hotel and watched her face learn a new shape. Instead, I put the iPad down like it might explode and went for a walk under the river bridges where the city hums in concrete and steel. I counted steps the way I count retries on a failing service. I thought about failure modes, denial, escalation, rage, retreat. None of those fixed the system. The part of me that does incident response started drafting a ticket, collect logs, verify, reproduce, document. I hate the word evidence when it comes to love, but love, like production, breaks quietly until it doesn't. The email that settled the question arrived 2 nights later while Claire slept in a two-shirt from a 5K we ran together back when we believed in 5Ks. Her laptop glowed on the coffee table, open to a deck titled Q3 Growth Story. The notification slid on like a whisper. Last night was unforgettable. It was from Richard. The preview line showed enough to turn my blood thin. I did not open it immediately. I walked to the sink and turned on the water like a person in a movie buying time. When I came back, the email was still there, patient as gravity. Inside, sentences that would sound like parody if they weren't destroying something real. Phrases that start in hotel elevators and end in sentences like, "I can't stop thinking about you in that dress." Claire's reply was worse in its ordinariness. "I keep replaying the way you looked at me in the cab, like I was the pitch in the wind." You don't send that to your boss by mistake. You send it because lines have been erased and replaced with exit signs. I didn't wake her. I copied the thread into a hidden folder on a drive she never used and closed the laptop. I sat beside it until the sun turned the room pale and the buildings across the way lit windows one by one. At 8, Claire yawned like a person who had slept inside a lie without sweating. She kissed me on the temple and said, "Do you want anything from Pret?" She had a campaign kickoff. She had a war room. She had a man who wrote unforgettable about my wife in a line that didn't belong to me. There's a style of revenge that is loud and messy and gives the internet something to chew. I don't have a taste for spectacle. What I do have is a respect for systems. In corporate systems, consequences don't come from anger. They come from compliance. You don't scream at a vice president. You route through policy. The agency had a code of conduct PDF on its site, zero tolerance for relationships that compromise power dynamics, and an ethics point link promising confidentiality. I read the PDF twice to make sure the words meant what they looked like. I drafted the report like I would a bug, reproducible steps, attached artifacts, scope of impact. I didn't write husband or hurt or betrayal. I wrote subordinate, misuse of company resources, favoritism, exposure to litigation risk. I wrote dates pulled from calendar invites and receipts. I wrote locations. I wrote that a VP's card had been used at a boutique hotel at hours that didn't match a normal workday. I submitted through the portal using a burner address and a VPN exit somewhere in Ohio because the irony of routing a complaint through another state amused the part of me that still knows how to laugh at small things. Ethics hotlines don't explode, they smolder. The first smoke was Claire mentioning an informal check-in with HR about boundaries after a concern was raised. She rolled her eyes like the word had offended her. She said someone on her team was threatened by her presence in rooms that used to be guys only, and people weaponize policy when they're threatened. I wanted to yell that she had weaponized me. Instead, I put a beer bottle in the recycling and said, "Do you feel safe?" Because that's the thing you're supposed to ask when HR is involved, even if the danger is something you invited. She said she was fine. She kissed me like punctuation. She went back to her deck. I didn't stop at the report. Systems fail when there's one monitor. I started building a map. Screenshots of Slack DMs she'd forgotten to archive where he wrote, "You made today bearable," and she replied with a winky face and a knife. Receipts in our shared finance app from Ubers that did North Side loops ending conveniently near the same hotel. Photos she had snapped without thinking. A mirrored lobby, a dessert with a sparkler at midnight, a view of the river from too high up to be the office. I wasn't stockpiling to humiliate her on the internet. I was building a forensic trail for the only people who can take an executive's keys, HR, legal, the board. The second smoke arrived as a schedule change. Richard canceled an off-site Claire had been crowing about for a week, citing a board thing. He moved her out of 2 client calls and put someone else in without explanation. The morning after, Claire paced our hallway on her phone and whispered, I need to know if this is about me," then stopped talking when she saw me pretending not to listen. That night she came to bed so quiet the mattress didn't acknowledge her. I lay awake and stared at the ceiling where car headlights made ghost bridges and tried to imagine my life saying the words I'm being cheated on out loud. The words lined up but refused to step off the edge. If you want to understand the corporate heart, go to a quarterly all hands. The agency rented a ballroom at a hotel that served coffee and urns that never get truly hot. A stage, a screen, a playlist that says we're cool without paying licensing for songs people actually love. I attended because spouses were invited and I had told myself that seeing them in daylight might make it easier to accept that I'd begun a process I couldn't undo. Claire looked like promotion bait in a navy dress and sneakers that made her look like she could run toward success faster than anyone. Richard wore a suit that cost more than my first car and a tan that said he knew what January looks like in another hemisphere. His opening laugh was a practice rope swing. Midway through the Q&A, someone asked about ethics culture. He said, "We're not perfect, but we're serious," and his eyes did not flinch. Claire clapped, and I felt the weird urge to vomit into a fern. After the meeting, an HR director named Melissa Square Glasses, sensible flat, smile that knows how to be kind without promising anything, introduced herself to me as if we had not already met in the least romantic corner of the internet. "You're Claire's husband?" she said, not asked. "I'm Melissa." It could have been nothing. It could have been everything. Claire appeared at my elbow with a drink and moved us away before small talk could build a house around us. In the elevator, she said, "You made a face when Melissa came over." I said, "I make faces." She said, "Don't ruin tonight," like the night was a thing I had my hands on and not a shape she'd drawn without me. The first interview hit 2 days later. Claire came home early, hair scraped into a bun like she'd pulled it out of a conversation. She poured wine with the precision of someone using alcohol as a ruler. They asked if I've ever felt coerced, she said, making the word sound like she was trying on a dress she wouldn't buy. I told them no, it's ridiculous. Someone is trying to tear me down. I asked who. She named a woman on her team who had once cried in a bathroom after Richard told her she didn't have a presence in meetings. It was easy to hate that man. It was less easy to hold my face in a way that did not confess. If we had been a different couple, maybe that's where the confession happens. Maybe I say, "I saw your email," and we fight until one of us breaks something that isn't a dish. But the version of me that had filed an anonymous complaint decided to stay anonymous a little longer. I wanted the system to do its job without the marital melodrama. I wanted to see if the machine works when given the right inputs. There's a kind of cowardice in that. There's also a kind of discipline. I'm still not sure which one I was practicing. Meanwhile, my evidence folder grew. I noticed she had started to keep her work bag zipped. I noticed because I'm the one who used to tuck a granola bar into it before morning meetings. The zipper didn't stop me from noticing a hotel room key sleeve migrate from the trash to the bottom of our junk drawer as if in hiding. I found a receipt wedged into a novel on our nightstand, double espresso, Mal 4, 1041 a.m., the hotel cafe I had mapped on the invite. I took photos and then placed everything back the way it was. I started sleeping on the couch 3 nights a week without explanation so she could have the bed she'd already been sharing with ghosts. I told her I had late deployments because that's a plausible lie in my world. She said thank you, like I had given her a gift. In a way, I had. Cover is a kind of present we choose not to wrap. I didn't tell anyone. Not my brother in Oak Park who would have driven over with a baseball bat. Not my friend Dev who once left a post-it on my monitor that said, "You can do hard things." I went to work. I answered tickets. I configured monitoring that would outlast me. I bought groceries. I chopped onions while the apartment filled with a smell that belongs to home. I lived inside a vacuum and called it maturity. When Claire laughed at a TikTok on the couch, I felt the laugh as a betrayal of the gravity of my folder. Then I realized she was laughing because she wanted for a minute to be a person and not a plot. I hated that I understood. The machine finally moved. Claire was placed on administrative leave pending an investigation. The email used the kind of gentle corporate vocabulary that tries to wrap a bandage around a bullet wound. Temporary, routine, standard. She read it at the kitchen island and turned the screen toward me as if to prove the world had performed an error. "This is insane," she said, and then, softer, "Do you think this is about me and Richard?" The question landed between us like a glass of water we both pretend not to see. I said, "I don't know." She said, "I want a lawyer." I said, "Okay." She said, "I didn't do anything wrong, and the lie didn't even try to be good. I expected rage." I got a weird tranquility. She moved around the apartment with a focus I recognized from when she prepped for presentations, lists, phone calls, a flurry of emails. She said, "Due process." Twice in a tone people borrow from TV shows to make themselves sound protected. She called Richard and he didn't answer. She called again. He didn't answer. She texted him. The message turned blue and stayed unread. I watched a person learn in real time what a power differential feels like when the wind changes. I did not enjoy it. I did not look away. 2 days into her leave, I got a call at work from a number that showed as unknown, which always makes my heart stutter because I've spent a career teaching systems not to be unknown. A voice. "This is Melissa from HR. I'd like to ask you a few questions as part of our investigation, if you're willing." I stared at my monitor where an alert was asking for a restart after an update and said, "I don't think I can help because I wanted to keep my anonymity clean." She said, "We're simply seeking context about schedules and travel. You may decline." I said I would prefer email. She thanked me in a way that told me she had boxed me in as reluctant but cooperative, a label that would keep her file neat. That night, Claire cooked, which she does when she needs to feel like life is something you can plate. She made a pasta we used to call first the day pasta even after we were 4 years married. Halfway through her second glass of wine, she said, "If someone is spreading rumors, I'm going to sue." I said, "Rumors are what people tell when they don't have emails." She squinted like I'd spoken in math. "What does that mean?" she asked. "It means documentation matters," I said, "because that sentence is always true." She put her fork down and said, "You're being weird." I wanted to say, "You're being a person I don't recognize." Instead, I asked if she wanted more Parmesan and grated until it snowed. She started sleeping with her phone under her pillow the way teenagers do or people who owe casinos money. She jumped when notifications arrived and then tried to look like she hadn't. Once, the screen flashed and I glimpsed a name I didn't know, Tanya HR Legal. Another time, draft statement. At 3 a.m., she went to the living room and came back smelling like tears and mint. When I woke at 6, she was already dressed, makeup on, hair in a knot that meant battle. She said she was going to yoga. She doesn't do yoga. She came back 2 hours later with a calm that felt imported. I realized she had gone to her sister's in Lincoln Park to rehearse a story. I learned that stories end when facts land. The agency's network had been sloppy for years, a SharePoint with more anyone with the link than was wise, a G-Drive culture where drafts become canon without permission. I knew this because Claire complained about it when she felt righteous and exploited it when she didn't. Ethan in Creative had once joked that the company's security posture was password brand. When HR and legal actually look, the laziness becomes a river of artifacts, meeting invites, expense reports, photos from office sites that show who went to which bar at what hour. Claire had posted a boomerang on a private Instagram story of champagne flutes clinking in a hotel room with a caption that contained the brand client's hashtag. People commit their own evidence. The cloud simply volunteers to preserve it. When the agency moved from leave to suspension, the email arrived for Claire at 41:17 p.m. on a Friday, like people send bad things right before they close their laptops. She stared at the subject line for 30 seconds like she could edit it with her eyes. She shut the computer gently, as if loudness could make it worse. She said, "I need to go for a drive." I said, "Okay." She drove to the lake and sat where the sand turns to concrete and sent text to a man who was suddenly very busy being unreachable. I know because I tracked her in Find My. The feature we turned on for safety 2 years ago when my car got broken into in Pilsen and that I had not turned off because Hope is lazy. She came home after midnight smelling like cold air and panic. She climbed in the bed and lay there like someone auditioning for sleep. I lay beside her and counted the kind of breaths they teach you in meditation apps. Neither of us slept like people. The next twist arrived with a knock. A courier handed me an envelope addressed to both of us from the agency's counsel. Inside, a bland request to preserve any work-related communications on personal devices for the scope of a workplace investigation. That's when I felt it, the click of a line crossing into my house. Not just a marriage problem, a legal one. Claire read the letter and said, "They can't do that," which is something people say when they hope law listens to feelings. I explained what I knew, that when your personal device contains work stuff, boundaries move. I said words like litigation hold and discovery. She nodded in the rhythm of someone hearing their own heartbeat through water. I wish I could say I was noble throughout. that I never felt the hot, mean joy of watching a man who called my wife unforgettable learn what an ethics portal can do, that I didn't refresh the case status page like a teenager refreshing a crush's Instagram. But there were moments I wanted blood, moments where the idea of Richard being walked out of a building with a banker's box felt like cool water. I made coffee and reminded myself my goal wasn't theater, it was consequence. If I made it a show, I'd become the bad guy in someone else's comment section, and, worse, I'd let the facts get slippery. Facts need quiet to do their job. I set a rule: I would not publish anything. I would not go to Reddit, to TikTok, to the group chat, to TikTok, to the group chat. I would route my pain through the lane that punishes men like Richard, the one with policy and precedent. The only exception I made was Jocelyn. She's a friend in IT at my company who has seen compliance from the inside and can tell you how an investigation turns real. I didn't tell her names, I told her shapes. She said, document. Don't narrate, she said. Don't give them your anger, give them your artifacts. She said, if he tries to make her the aggressor, make sure your timeline shows who held the keys. I wrote those lines on a sticky note and put it under my keyboard like a secular prayer. Days became a study in waiting. Claire alternated between fury and strategy. She met with a lawyer downtown who wore a suit the color of apology. She drafted statements that said words like mentorship and opportunity and insisted nothing inappropriate had happened. She asked me to read one, and I had to sit on the floor beside the dishwasher to keep from laughing out of a place that wasn't humor. It sounds like a press release, I said. It is, she said, offended. That's how you get ahead of narratives. I said, truth is a better narrative. She said, you sound naive, and then flinched because the word landed wrong between us. We both apologized and then didn't say aloud the thing we both knew: truth is useless to people who decide doors should open for them regardless. When the agency finally moved on Richard, it moved like an unseen hand. He left for a sabbatical, announced in a 2-paragraph email that said he was taking time to be with family, which is corporate, for we negotiated this in a room with a view. The photo attached was 10 years old. Claire read the email 3 times and said, this is good, like the chessboard had shifted in her favor. She didn't understand yet that when a king tumbles, pawns don't inherit the board, they get swept into the same box. Within an hour, Melissa scheduled a final interview with Claire for Monday morning. It'll be fine, Claire said. With Richard gone, the heat will die. I said nothing. Heat moves like weather. It doesn't ask us what we prefer. Sunday night felt like the night before surgery. The apartment was too clean. Claire laid out a blazer and a blouse and shoes that say competent without saying I run this place. She printed emails she believed exonerated her. She highlighted sentences where Richard praised her work. She believed praise could double as proof of innocence because that's how men like him plant trees that look like shade. I wanted to take the papers and mark them with the truth. You cannot mentor someone in a hotel room after midnight without turning mentorship into leverage. No highlighter fixes that. Instead, I kissed her on the forehead and said, tell the truth you can live with in 5 years. She said, what does that mean? I said, future you will either thank present you or hate her. She stared like she was trying to decide whether I was on her side. I didn't go with her Monday. I went to work and tried to care about a deployment schedule. I made coffee that didn't taste like anything. At 9,043 she texted, starting now. At 11,017, over. At 11,010, can we talk when I'm home? At 12,002, please be there. At 12,037 she walked in, set her bag down and said, they're firing me. She said it like a line she had rehearsed in front of a mirror and now couldn't believe she had to perform in front of an audience of one. They're calling it cuz, she said, for policy violations and misuse of company funds. She looked at me as if I could write another ending. I sat with her on the floor because chairs felt too formal for a life coming apart. She cried in the silent way the body cries when it's run out of sound. Between breaths, she said, I didn't think. And I tried not to say yes, that's the sentence. She asked if I would stand by her if she sued. I said, I will not lie for you. She said, that's not what I asked. And she was right in the narrowest sense. She hadn't asked me to lie. She had asked me to be on her team even if the team's mission was to pretend gravity is optional. I told her I would help her pack a box. I told her I would make dinner. I told her we could survive the practical part. I did not tell her I had lit the first fuse. That night, after she fell into a sleep that had more to do with exhaustion than rest, I opened my folder and looked at what I had built. It was clinical, dates, times, locations. I had been careful never to include my marriage in it. No screenshots of our texts, no photos of her in our space, just the parts the company owned and had to answer for. I scrolled through the timeline and felt, for the first time, grief that looked like guilt. Not because I had done the wrong thing, because doing the right thing had the shape of betrayal when you zoomed in to the level of 2 people breathing the same air. It's a terrible angle, the one where justice and cruelty touch. In the morning, the machine churned on without us. Claire returned her badge and laptop, signed something in a room with a ficus, and came home with a banker's box that contained the life you're allowed to keep. A water bottle, a plant clipped at the stem, a notebook with pages ripped out where the story might have been. Her phone pinged with messages from colleagues whose texts were a soup of shock and silence, and sentences that say, I have to keep my job. Richard's name did not appear. Of course it didn't. Men like Richard let their absence do the talking. We ate eggs at 2 in the afternoon because eggs are what you make when there are no other nouns. Claire said, we can get through this, in the tone of a person negotiating with a tornado. I said, we can get through the logistics because bills and leases and groceries don't care about betrayal. Then she said the thing that bent my spine, I need you to be my reference for future jobs, you know my work. I stared at her like she had asked me to co-sign a loan for arson. I know your work, I said. That's the problem. She flinched. She went to the bedroom. The door closed with the heavy quiet of wood deciding it as a wall. What came next wasn't an ending. It was a pause where both of us sat in rooms we had decorated together and realized the furniture had begun to repeat a story neither of us could stand. I went to the balcony and watched the river carry pieces of someone else's day. I thought about the second half of this story I hadn't written yet, the part where karma stops being a theory and becomes a calendar, where HR's neat email becomes a public line item, where a man who loves systems enough to become one decides what to do with the rest of the evidence in his drawer. I stood there until the sun hit the glass of the building across from ours and turned it into a screen. For a second, I saw a reflection like a movie. Two people, one skyline, and a blank that looked like a choice. The morning after Claire lost her job, the apartment sounded like a house that was pretending not to be empty. Cabinets shut too softly. The kettle whistled like it was embarrassed to be loud. She sat at the island with her laptop open and 3 tabs she kept refreshing, a job board, her inbox, and a Google Doc titled Statement. Her hair was pulled back into the kind of bun that means business in movies and panic in real life. Every few minutes, she typed a sentence, then deleted it and typed a softer version, then deleted that too. I asked if she wanted coffee. She said no, like the word had bones. 10 minutes later, she poured herself coffee anyway and added sugar like it owed her something. By noon, she had a plan, or the shape of one. I'm going to meet a defamation attorney, she said, as if lawsuits could retroactively change decisions made in hotel elevators. And a reputation management firm. They help CEOs when there's a crisis. They do narratives. I swallowed the part of me that wanted to say the word narrative is what people use when truth is inconvenient. She called her sister, who said, "We're here for you," in a voice that remembered being left at a school play once when Claire forgot to show up. She called Richard. It went to voicemail. She called again. Voicemail. She texted him a paragraph that started with, "Are you okay?" and ended with, "Please pick up." The message turned blue and stayed unread like a bruise. In the afternoon, legal sent me a litigation hold letter. It was polite, officious, and thorough, the way a weather alert is thorough about a storm you can already see through the window. Please preserve any communications with or about Claire Adams, any records of meals, travel, or off-site meetings with Richard Hastings, and any calendar items that may be relevant to the investigation. The letter had a comforting bureaucracy. It meant I wasn't crazy. I archived, exported, labeled, and pushed everything to an encrypted drive that lived in a drawer under the spare printer ink. I didn't touch the folder that had started this. I didn't need to. The machine had it now. That night, she tried on Defense's light coats. It was consensual, she said, testing how the word felt in her mouth. It never affected my work. Then softer, he told me I was special. She searched my face the way people search a page for their name. Say something, she said. Something useful. I told her the only useful sentence I had, tell the truth you can live with 5 years from now. She laughed once, short and sharp. 5 years from now, I'll be in another industry, she said, and the laugh fell apart on the floor. She met the defamation lawyer the next morning. He had a view of the river and a tie that cost more than our couch. He used phrases like we can posture and discovery can be instructive and reputational harm as if they belonged in the same drawer as wedding china. When he said the word retainer, Claire's mouth went small. On the way down in the elevator, she said, he'll send the engagement letter with a confidence that belonged to yesterday. In the lobby, she Googled the reputation firm. Their homepage showed smiling ex-politicians standing in front of blank walls. She filled out a form. The auto reply promised a call in 24 hours. When they didn't call, she refreshed the inbox like that could pull the phone into ringing. HR interviewed me by email. Melissa sent questions with timestamps and, if you recall, and to your knowledge, and every other legal broom a company uses to sweep its corners. I answered in facts, dates, invoice amounts, attachments. I did not mention love or humiliation or the way the apartment had started to feel like a museum of confidence. I told the story the only way the system understands a story, as a sequence of documented events that point one direction even if you want them to turn back. A week later, Claire's lawyer advised her not to speak to the press. A week after that, a local business blog reached out anyway with a polite comment, subject line, and a reporter who wrote without adjectives. According to internal documents, Vice President Richard Hastings used a corporate card at the Barrymore Hotel on 6 occasions that coincide with late-night workshops with an employee who reported to him. 2 employees alleged verbal favoritism and retaliation. Claire read the sentence 3 times and said, "They used my name? They hadn't. Not yet. No, they hadn't. Not yet. But they had used the shape of her." Thanksgiving arrived like a social contract that didn't understand how to void itself. We went to her sister's in Lincoln Park because not going would have been a headline. The dining room smelled like thyme and the first fight a couple has every time they assemble a prefab bookshelf. We passed bowls and pretended to be a family that wasn't sitting over a sinkhole. Her brother-in-law asked how work was in the tone of a man testing the ice with one foot. Claire said, "I'm between engagements," a phrase so brittle it might have shattered if you looked at it straight. Her mother refilled her wine and said, "I raised you to be smarter than this." Claire's fork clinked against the plate. You raised me to survive, she said. Those are not the same thing. I took a bite of turkey and let the salt remind me that I could still taste. When we got home, she cried in the bathroom in the way people cry when their tears are a closed system. I stood in the hallway and stared at the spot on the wall where sunlight draws a rectangle at 4 in the afternoon and thought about all the rectangular things we pretend are doors. In bed, she turned away from me like sleep owed her. At 3 in the morning, I found her on the couch, foam light on her face, scrolling old photos of rooftop toasts and strategy whiteboards, the kind of nostalgia that sets traps. The company moved in slow steps, and then all at once, Richard stepped away to be with family. The email used words like transition and continuity, and we are grateful for his service and we wish him well. Nobody wrote, we are grateful for the hotels he helped the city's hospitality sector with. A week later, Claire got the letter that confirmed what we both already knew: termination for cause, bonus clawback, severance denied, company property to be returned, non-compete still in effect. She held the letter like it was a test result and we were waiting for a doctor to explain it. This isn't fair, she said, which is what people say when gravity works. Her next idea was to pivot. I'll consult, she said. There are startups that need brand strategy and don't care about corporate politics. She bought a domain with her name and put 3 case studies on a site that looked like a promise. For 2 weeks, she emailed people who used to respond to her in 10 minutes. They responded in silence. The only reply she got was from a man who wanted to know if she was open-minded about mentorship arrangements. She read it out loud, laughed without humor, and said, "They think I'll trade again." She didn't reply to that one. I watched her make a boundary and felt a tenderness I didn't know what to do with. Money introduced itself to the conversation like a bill collector at the door. Her credit card balances grew into a number with a comma in the wrong place. She had always been the kind of person who believed future raises would reconcile past indulgences. Raises had stopped. The indulgences hadn't. She asked me to co-sign a personal loan for 6 months max. I told her I wouldn't attach my name to her future. You're punishing me, she said. I am protecting myself, I said, and we both recognized in that exchange the marriage we no longer had. January brought weather that made honest people of the arteries. It also brought the end of our lease. I renewed in my name. She packed 2 suitcases and left behind things that used to be nouns, now just shapes. A mug from a campaign kickoff with her team's name on it. A blazer that still smelled like the cocktail bar where her boss called her unforgettable. A plant that refused to die out of spite. She moved into a friend's place in Uptown and texted me a forwarding address that promised temporary. I changed the locks that afternoon and discovered the kind of silence that doesn't ask you to explain it. A month later, the press turned its head. Not the tabloids, the business desks. Cranes ran a piece that read like a ledger. Misuse of company funds, governance lapses, ethics hotline reports mishandled, a vice president whose exit had not been planned, an employee fired for cause. They printed no photos, used no adjectives, and quoted an outside analyst saying, "This is why compliance exists." The story was not about us, which is why it mattered. It was about a machine that had broken and the documentation that made repair unavoidable. My phone buzzed at 9:12 p.m. with a text that read simply, "You did this." I stared at the screen long enough for it to lock, then typed, "No, you did," and put the phone face down like that made me a better person. She didn't reply. The internet did. LinkedIn posts went soft and non-committal. Slack channels we didn't belong to filled with, "What did you hear?" and "I heard." Someone attached a screenshot of a room service charge like it was a smoking gun instead of an invoice. People think justice is a gavel. Mostly, it's a paragraph. Richard landed at a boutique firm across the river with a new title that sounded like a synonym for undemoted. Claire sent a batch of applications to companies that use phrases like purpose, driven in their about pages. 2 sent rejection letters, the rest sent silence. She started waking up before sunrise to run by the lake again, a thing she had not done since the campaign that put her in a navy dress on a stage where she believed praise could be currency. The running didn't fix anything. It did make her cheeks look like she was alive. Sometimes I saw her on the path if I took the long loop. We did not wave. 2 people can occupy the same view and not the same world. There were more consequences, and they were not cinematic. A recruiter told her quietly that her name came up in background checks with words like policy violation and that no one wanted the first month of a new hire to be a crisis. A former coworker called and said, in the careful tone of someone who has learned what to say on recorded lines, that the company was implementing a formal rule about manager-subordinate relationships and that a lot of people are going to pretend they always followed it. She asked how he was. He said, "Tired," which is how you say you survived without declaring victory. I got invited to a deposition. Her lawyer asked me on the record whether I had tampered with corporate systems, a question that told me they were going to try to make a fight about hacking, because fights about morals are often less useful in court than fights about keys. I answered that I never accessed anything I wasn't authorized to access, and that the only thing I had exported was my patience. He asked if I had edited any files used by the company for presentations. I said no, because I hadn't. He asked if I had ever encouraged others to speak to the press. I said I hadn't spoken to the press at all. The court reporter typed like thunder. Her legal strategy then made a turn that looked like desperation wearing policy as a coat. A letter arrived alleging I had orchestrated a campaign of humiliation and interfered with future economic advantage. My lawyer, a woman with a mind that cuts and a smile that forgives nothing, wrote back 3 pages that cited things with numbers. Anti-slap. No private cause of action for humiliation. Truth is an absolute defense. She appended timestamps, expense reports, and the policy document the agency had published the year before, where the words power imbalance sat on their own line like a floor. Claire's mother called me once in February from a number I didn't recognize because she had never called me before. She won't listen to me, she said, as if I were a knob she could turn. She was always the one who believed the rules could be adjusted. I didn't know what to do with the ache in her voice. I said I was sorry for the shape of things and that I hoped Claire would find a decent landing. She said, the landing isn't what matters, it's the person who arrives. Then she apologized for calling, as if love needed permission. I saw Claire again in March in a place the city had built for men in suits to pretend they like salad. She was sitting across from a woman who wore the word founder in her posture. I tried not to eavesdrop. It's impossible not to eavesdrop in a room where you can hear ice settle in glasses. Claire said, I learned my lesson. The founder asked, which one? Claire said nothing for a span that felt like a test. That shortcuts put you on a road with no exits, she said finally. The founder nodded the way people nod when they want to like someone and need someone else to go first. When I paid, Claire pretended not to see me. I pretended to believe her. Spring pushed the city toward a color that made winter look like a rumor. I joined a weekend running group and learned the names of 3 people's dogs before I learned the people's names. I replaced the living room rug and bought a table we hadn't picked together. On a Sunday, I stood on the balcony with a cup of coffee, and the part of me that used to save receipts for some imagined audit went quiet. The NAS hummed at 3 in the morning like always. The alarm stayed obediently silent. I wasn't happy in the way Instagram means it. I was steady. Steady turns out to be rarer and more expensive. In May, an email with the subject line request for comment landed in my inbox, this time from a reporter who actually called me by my first name and spelled it right. She had a copy of a board memo about post-incident reforms and wanted context on the employee experience during the months when the company chose silence. I answered off the record as a human being who had watched a machine learn. She quoted no one. The piece ran anyway, calm as a ledger. The last paragraph named a new policy with teeth and a third-party ethics monitor whose invoices would now be paid on time. Change never looks like a victory lap. It looks like a paragraph near the bottom that said, effective immediately. Claire moved apartments in June. She texted me out of nowhere, asking if I had a copy of a video from a vacation we took the year before she started at the agency. The one with the ferry, she wrote. I can't find it. I had it. I didn't ask why she wanted it. Maybe to remember a version of herself that hadn't learned certain doors were not meant to open that way. I sent her a link that expired in 24 hours. She wrote back, thank you. I left it there. Some acts aren't reconciliations. They're just small proofs you still know how to be a person. The last time I saw Richard was on a bench outside a building that used to be a bank and is now a brand studio, because that's what cities do to marble when finance moves into the cloud. He was in shirt sleeves, on the phone, using his voice like a tool. He laughed the way men laugh when they know an invoice will make this conversation someone else's problem. He didn't see me. I considered saying his name and letting him experience the mild disorientation of being visible to someone you owe a debt to. I didn't. Some debts collect themselves. Some men don't know what they owe until the ledger arrives in a room with bad coffee and a lawyer who says things like, you'll want to read this part twice. Summer taught me that you can only tell a story so many times before even the true parts start to feel like camouflage. Friends stopped asking and started inviting. We grilled on rooftops and pretended not to check the weather apps every 12 minutes. I learned to make a steak that doesn't need a sauce. A neighbor asked if I would water her plants while she was in Michigan, and I said yes and didn't imagine her plants as metaphors. I worked. I slept. On Tuesdays, I called my brother and we talked about absolutely nothing and then exactly the right thing. Claire tried one more pivot in July. She launched a course online called Story as Strategy. The trailer was good. She looked into the camera the way she looks at a room, with that trick of making everyone think she has already said their name. Her examples were smart. Her price point? Wrong. The comments ate her. Someone doxed her. She shut the course down and posted a note about stepping back to reassess. I didn't screenshot anything. I didn't send it to anyone. I closed the tab because sometimes mercy is just the decision not to voyeur. And then came the twist I didn't expect because it didn't involve her and therefore felt like weather I hadn't noticed. Our company announced a partnership with her old agency's competitor, the kind of deal that makes executives send all staff emails with words like thrilled and thrilled again. The new partner's security lead asked for a discreet reference on my approach to compliance because anyone who can hold a line when both sides are pushing is useful. I had not set out to be useful this way. I told him the truth I could live with, that I had learned you can document your way out of a lie, but you cannot document your way back into love. He laughed like he understood, then asked about endpoint hardening. In August, Claire's mother texted me a photo of a dinner table with a missing chair and the caption she'll come back to herself. I wrote, I hope so. She sent a heart, the kind that looks like 2 pieces leaning against each other to make one thing. I stared at the icon longer than a person should stare at a cartoon and then put the phone down and went for a run because running is the only prayer I know how to say without lying. I have exactly one regret that has arms and legs and follows me around sometimes, that I didn't say the word stop out loud sooner, to myself, not to Claire, to me. I knew where this road was going when I saw the first calendar invite with the hotel address and the description that said workshop like that made midnight a reasonable time to talk about Q3. I told myself I was gathering evidence because I am a man who honors the log. Maybe I was also gathering courage. Maybe all I did was delay a fire that could have burned smaller if I'd lit it when the kindling was young. I can forgive the part of me that thought patience would transform facts. Facts resist transformation. That is their mercy and their cruelty. The last message I ever received from Claire arrived on a Sunday night when the city felt like it was listening to itself breathe. It said, in one line, I'm trying to be the kind of person who could be forgiven. I read it 3 times and did nothing for 2 days because response is a currency and I didn't want to spend it wrong. On Tuesday morning, I wrote back, I hope you become that person for you, not for anyone else. She replied, I know, it didn't sound like a lie. That's the end I have. Not applause, not a bow. A sentence that acknowledges we share a city and a past and a biology that requires sleep. Sometimes I run past the hotel with the lobby that smells like a dentist's idea of luxury, and I picture a version of us who never learned how easy it is to rename a door. That version is not useful. I let it keep walking. I go home, I make dinner, I email my boss a list that right sizes risk. I text my brother a photo of a rising dough that finally looks like it's going to be bread. If you want a lesson, I only have the ordinary kind. Power makes liars of people who think rules are just recommendations. Companies will protect themselves, eventually, if you hand them the map and stay quiet while they read it. Revenge doesn't feel like fireworks. It feels like sleeping through the night. Karma is not a dramatic scene, it's a calendar. It arrives on a Monday with a meeting invite and the subject line says policy update. The people who cheered you in rooms you didn't earn will forget your name. The people who knew your middle name will remember the way you stirred the sauce on a night when there was nothing to celebrate and you did it anyway. If you're lucky, you learn to want the second kind of memory. And if you're listening because you want to know what to do, I can tell you what I did. I documented. I stayed out of the comment sections. I didn't publish anything I couldn't defend in a room with a stenographer. I told the truth when asked and kept my anger on a leash. I let the system eat the piece of this it was designed to digest. Then I left the table. I walked out into air that didn't care about me. I learned how to like that. Would you have done it differently? Would you have packed a bag and disappeared quietly? Or would you have held the mirror up in the place she feared most and let the room see itself? Tell me what you would have done and why. If this story made you think or feel anything at all, drop your take in the comments, hit like so, it finds the next person who needs it, and subscribe if you want more. True, messy, unglamorous endings where the only special effect is consequence.